It was a big fight on the streets of Warsaw, and we had so many barricades all over the place. And I had this friend that I heard, I can't remember now how I knew that she was in the hospital. Stefania was her name, Stefa. And I don't know, somebody maybe told me that she's in this hospital and she would like to see me. So I went to see her, and when I came to see her, she was lying in bed in the hospital, and she said to me, Maria, I don't know what happened. I have such a terrible craving for something sour. Is it a sour pickle, a piece of herring, anything sour? I can't even sleep at night. It bothers me. I don't know what's going on with me. And I was very sorry for her. And then when I came, at that time I lived with Mrs. Kulczycki and Rena, her daughter. I mean, we just adopted an empty apartment. We used to, during the uprising, nobody had a permanent place. We used to go from street to street, and she was looking for her husband at that time. So since we were stuck together during the uprising in the library, in the same yard, we were always together. I mean, we liked each other, and when Rena kept saying, we'll go back to Poland, my parents will adopt you, that was Mrs. Kulczycka. Anyhow, I came back, and I told them the story of this poor Stefa who is lying sick and is craving for something sour. And Mrs. Kulczycki, I don't know how, she was a fabulous woman. One day she came with a can of spinach, and we don't know how she got it, where she got it. She warmed it up, and we had spinach for supper. Mm-hmm. And when I told her, one day she came and she had 3 olives, and I don't know how she got it. And she said, now you can take it for your friend to the hospital. So I had to get to the hospital. In the meantime, it was a fierce, fierce battle on the street of Warsaw. The shots were falling right and left. And as I was running towards the hospital, I saw many people dead in different positions on the sidewalks, on the streets. But I had to get to this hospital to give her the 3 olives. And eventually I did get to the hospital, and I gave her the olives. And luckily enough, nothing happened to me, but I realized that that I really wasn't normal by doing so, with all the dangers around me. So later, and I never knew what happened because we couldn't communicate because of the fighting. We couldn't walk streets. So a few months later, I met her.
Who?
This Stefa. She was okay. She said to me, Maria, you saved my life. You know what it means? The 3 olives at that time were so good. I enjoyed it so much. And she said, because of this, I want you to come and I'll make for you a special pea soup. A pea soup. Mm-hmm. And pea soup, that was something that who had peas and who had a soup, you know. And that was the reward that eventually I got when I went to her place for a pea soup, for those 3 olives.
When did you see her? How long ago?
I never saw her again. After the pea soup, I never saw her again. And very often there were fierce hours, and I used to see so many dead people on the street that still haunts me. The positions. Mm-hmm. Once I saw a man in a strange position. He had his hand over his, like this, Carl, over his head, like as he would have a book, reading a book when you lie on a couch and you keep your head. And that's how I saw him dead on the street. The most bizarre positions. But there were quite a lot of people dead. Mm-hmm. A lot of dead people. Many Poles fell during the uprising.
Civilians or fighters?
Civilians, fighters. Even the fighters were dressed in civilian clothes. You know, nobody had uniforms at that time. Uh-huh. So I really don't know. But it was a very dangerous period. Mm-hmm. You couldn't move around streets, but I was the only one. So I was thinking now, perhaps I really was a little mad to do a thing like that, perhaps.
Were certain areas of the city controlled by the Germans? And how did you know what was controlled with what?
We knew the Polish side and the German side. It's like in every battle, you always have sides. Somehow we knew the barricades on one side were Polish and the other side were German. Uh-huh. And if you wanted to go from side, sometimes certain streets were divided by barricades. although they were in the Polish section, and you had to jump over barricade to get from one street to the other one, but very often we used to go, we had underground, since Warsaw had cellars. Every building had cellars. In every building we had cellars, and we used to dig from building to building, whole streets you could go past through cellars. The whole life was really underground for civilian people. Underground, you can walk one street to the other one only by opening walls through cellars. So we traveled through those cellars only. Yeah, that was the only way. We couldn't travel through streets normally, naturally, during an uprising when there was fierce fighting. You never know from where, a bullet will come, from which side. You never knew. When I took part in the Polish uprising, that was a little bit later, when we found Rena's father, and he inducted me into the underground army, and I was doing messages with her together. And so one day we captured a warehouse filled with bags of sugar in lumps. And we had to carry them to a certain place, to a safer place. So imagine me carrying 50 kilo of a sack on my back. Everybody had to carry. We worked very hard, but we could fill our pockets any place we had with sugar cubes. And any time I felt faint from hunger, I would munch on sugar cubes, and that saved me. Those sugar cubes were very good, So that, for a while, I was eating day and night sugar cubes. People were starving, really, starving. The beginning, I started with Rena. Whenever there was a password, we used to bring the password from one headquarters to another headquarters in different parts of our city, the Polish part. And later I branched out, and they started to send me out to burning buildings, and I had to run from floor to floor and check if there aren't any people there left, trapped.
Do you want to go back? Just tell me more about this whole password business.
The password was plain that from one headquarters to the other one, there was a certain way of communication through passwords. Otherwise, a German could sneak in, and they had their own passwords that I was very ignorant of the whole thing. But Rena's father used to send Rena with a password. He would say, try to get to Leszno Street with this, and when you come to General X, give him this password. So when she had to go, he would say, Maria will go with you. Take Maria along. Because she was the only daughter, I guess he always was afraid of her. So he wanted her to have company, and he would say, take Maria along. So I would go with her, I never asked her the password, because she was not supposed to tell me. I was just a companion. She had the password, and I never asked. I knew that secrecy was very important. I didn't want to put her in a spot, So I never knew what was but she would go in to the headquarters, to the office, and I would wait outside, and she would give them the password. And that's how we worked quite a lot, both of us together. But later, I guess they started to send somebody else, or I can't remember how did it happen, that I started to go around to the burning buildings, that somebody said, Maria, you do this the first time, and then it became that I was going always whenever there was, the Germans had little plates, tiny little plates they will throw on a roof, and it will start a fire. I don't know what do you call those little plates. They will ignite a fire right away. And we had always burning buildings. Anyhow, so I used to run from building to building. Naturally, I didn't go when it was impossible to enter a building. But wherever it was still possible, if I could see people shouldn't be trapped, you know. And many times I would have to drag people out, children or all elderly ladies in a panic. I would push them out from the fire and try to take them down. I wasn't the only one. There were many other ones that helped. We helped each other. We worked in groups, and I was one of them. You know, a fight in a city is the most horrible thing, because you don't know from where this comes. They were somewhere even far, but they could throw those things on your roof, or they could shoot from a roof, etc. So you're always cautious, always in a, you know, in a danger. You were always in danger. With me, it was also something strange. I would run and fall very often. I still have marks all over my knees from falling on broken glass, and I was always bandaged. Whenever anybody looked at me, I always had bandages. Till today, I have the bandages, Karen. I still have them. Yeah. Dirty, bleeding, you know, hardly washed. We didn't have enough water. And so that's what I did. And then when they called me the Mad Maria, now I start thinking maybe they were right, because I did take all kinds of chances. I didn't sit like some people were afraid and stayed in their basements or in their cellars underneath, underground. I couldn't sit. I had to be out and take part in it. And I had a chance with not Professor Sass. You know, my Mr. Kulczycki was captain. He was a captain. Captain Sass was his title. So being around him made me feel very good, because I liked him, I knew him, and I was very friendly with his wife and daughter.
Were you, like, all day long, every day, were you doing these things, or how sporadic was this activity?
It wasn't
what would you
all
be
the
doing?
time.
What would you be doing in between?
Nothing, just vegetating. There was nothing to do. We didn't have any books, and we didn't have any clothes, and we couldn't take a bath, and there wasn't any hot water. It was a chaos. Chaos. And we would sit in the headquarters and talk to the people who were sitting with me together and waiting for something to happen, some kind of an order, you know, or if the shooting started. I never had a rifle in my hand, Carl. Never. I never shot at anybody, but I helped any way I could. I had to type a letter. I asked me, I would type. I wasn't a professional typist, but I could type, you know. And if they wanted me to check on a burning building, they would say, Maria, you and the few people go and check. We would run like crazy, I especially. So I somehow had a funny feeling in me that I can do these things. I had nothing to lose. I was daring. I was very daring at that time. And I didn't care what will happen to me. So that's why I was active all the time. Young people, they were all patriots. They did things that were unbelievable. Sacrificed their lives, really. It was a strange thing when I lived with the Kulczyckis, still after the uprising, before they evacuated Warsaw. I don't know how, but the daughter-in-law of Mrs. Brochowski and her sister somehow found me. Or I found them, I don't know. And you know, the interesting thing is that the daughter-in-law looked very Jewish. She wasn't really Jewish, but she looked so Jewish that she had very dark black eyes and a big nose. I mean, Jewish people don't look this way. Her sister didn't. Her sister was a chubby little thing. Anyhow, they came to visit me while I was with Mrs. Brochowski and Renata. And Mrs. Brochowski, when they left, said to me, who is this Jewess that came to visit you? Can you imagine the situation?
Yeah.
I was the Jewess, but nobody suspected. And she, the real Polish woman, was suspected of being Jewish. A few days before the uprising fell, a few days before, there was everybody was in a very bad mood. Like we knew we failed. We knew the Germans won. Anyhow, we knew that they'll have to evacuate Warsaw because the Russians started a fight with the Germans. The Russians were on the other side of the Vistula, you know, and they were standing, they were watching, enjoying themselves. They let the Poles and the Germans fight. And finally, I remember that somebody came to me and said, Maria, you are a lieutenant now. Do you want we should give you on your head, and your head, all we had I think is caps. We didn't have any uniforms. We didn't have any clothes specially. But we could put an extra stripe on your head. I said, okay, all right. And then I heard that there's going to be an evacuation of the population, that the Germans are going to evacuate. They knew somehow, evacuate the whole city. So I said to myself, the day when we had to go out to the Germans as prisoners of war, 2 days before I disappeared, and I went to stay with Genia, a friend of mine, Genia Viatesco. I stayed with her a few days. She was a nurse. She worked in the hospital just beside her house. They had a hospital. And since we heard of the evacuation, and I said that I'm going out with the civilian population, she said, Maria, I'm sorry, I'll probably go out to the hospital, but you cannot go out with me, so you better go out with the population. And she parted with a fur coat. She had two, but she gave me a fur coat. She gave me some of her clothes. I shouldn't be cold because we didn't know where they'll take us. And gave me a few blouses and dresses. And the day of the evacuation, they were supposed to be at a certain point, and I left her. We said goodbye to each other, and I left, and we stayed in certain barracks. From there, they took us out of the city. I didn't want to go out with the army to the Germans, although I already got my stripe and everything, but knowing that I'm Jewish, Karen, I didn't want to be noticeable. There I was afraid. I figured with thousands of people going out, leaving Warsaw, nobody will notice me. Mm-hmm. I mean, better chances of not being noticed, that's what I mean.
So remaining the civilian, just melting back into
melting with everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's when they took us to a place outside Warsaw, and there they separated us, as I said in the tape there, into, and Rena's parents were separated. Her father was with us too, although now I remember, he was with us. I guess he didn't go out, with the army. He stayed with his wife and daughter. So they separated Mr. Kurczycki and Mrs. Kurczycki, Rena and I, and that's when we met Jadzia. She somehow joined us, we were three young Polish girls. You see, we kept together